All right. So today we have um, a couple of guests, and I will let them introduce themselves. We're going to be talking about academic careers, how to prepare for for job searching, and any other wisdom that our faculty have to offer. Um, Adam, I will start with you. Would you like to say your department, your name, your research, and how long you've been with UCSD?
Yeah, my pleasure. So, hi everyone. My name is Professor Adam Bergasser. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm in the Department of Physics. I've been a physics faculty member now for 11 years, I think. And I was previously an undergraduate at UCSD back in the previous millennium. My work is mostly on observational astrophysics. I study the very smallest and coolest stars in the universe. We have to use specialized telescopes and infrared instrumentation to do this. But this is kind of the nuts and bolts of what I do in terms of my research. Why don't I go ahead and bounce it over to Professor Fenny.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. I'm David Fenning. I'm an associate professor in nanoengineering. All my degrees are in mechanical engineering, but we mostly work on materials for solar cells and electric catalysis. So we think about the defects in materials and how they govern the performance of devices for renewable energy primarily. And I'm now in my 6th year at UCSD. And then I think Zainab.
Thank you, Dave. Hi, everyone. I'm Zainab Jahed. I'm a very new professor, assistant professor in the Department of Nanoengineering. I just started last November. So it's only almost half a year that I've been in the nanoengineering department. Before that, my degrees are all over the place. I did my undergraduate in a program called mechatronics engineering, which is somewhere between mechanical, electrical, and computer engineering. And I did that up north in Canada at the University of Waterloo. And then from there, I did a master's in nanotechnology and chemical engineering at the same university at Waterloo. And then from there, I moved to Berkeley for my PhD, where I was between the departments of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and bioengineering. So the program that I was in was called Applied Science and Technology. And kind of you could take courses from all these different departments. And my PI was between mechanical and bioengineering. So I got into bioengineering related research there. And then finally I moved to Stanford for my postdoc, where I was in the chemistry department. And I did more nanoelectronics work. So my research now here at UC San Diego in the nanoengineering department is also focused on building electronics at the nanoscale that can interface with mammalian cells, and they can record different parameters from these cells. And I don't know which other faculty is it, Daniel?
Yes, I'm last to go. So hi, I'm Dan Green. I'm a assistant professor in the physics department. I broadly defined do theoretical physics, and I guess my specialty is the combination of understanding the very beginning of the universe and how that sheds light on things like particle physics and sort of fundamental principles. So I've kind of done a lot of different things. All my degrees are in physics, but I've ventured around many subfields of physics over my career. I've been in San Diego for 4 years, I think officially. I started in 2017, and before that, I was a faculty member in the University of Toronto at a place called the Canadian Institute for Theoretical Astrophysics. So I've been faculty somewhere for about 8 years now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And just as an FYI, this session is super informal. Please go ahead and put in the chat, unmute yourself. We want to make sure that we answer all of your questions up front. So if anything comes up, just go ahead and again, mute yourself or put it in the chat. Well, for some of you, it's been a while since you've probably done the job search, and for some of you it's been more recent. But I wanted to ask, what are some things that were helpful along the way in helping you prepare and secure that job? And in no particular order, if any of you want to go first, you may.
I'm happy to jump in since I'm the senior elder here, and it's been the longest time for me, I guess. So let me explain a little bit of my path. So as I mentioned, I was at UCSD as an undergraduate. I went to Caltech as a grad student in physics. And from there, I did 2 postdoctoral positions, one at UCLA in astronomy, and then another at actually an interesting facility, the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. If you've been to New York City and you've seen the great big metal sphere of the planetarium, I worked kind of on the 4th floor looking over that planetarium. So that was kind of an unusual position to have. And then I actually did a faculty position at MIT in the physics department for about 5 years before coming out here. So in terms of the things that help, so it certainly in my field of physics and astronomy, it's typical to do 1, 2, maybe up to 3 postdoctoral positions before you go into a faculty position. And those postdoctoral periods are really, those are the times where you kind of establish yourself as an independent scientist and you start to do, your own work. So some of you who are postdocs know this. Some of you who are grad students, your first kind of major novel work will be the components in your thesis. And often you will, either continue to develop the ideas in your thesis, which is something I did, or you may jump into a new area, which sounds like Zainab has done. Kind of multiple new areas as she's progressed through her field. But that postdoctoral period is kind of the key period where you start to really establish, what is it that you want to do in the long term, or at least as you sort of develop your professional research load. And one way I think about it, particularly kind of at that postdoc to faculty transition, is you're almost proposing like a new thesis, but it's a much more ambitious thesis. And it's one that you're not doing on your own, but you're envisioning sort of the plan for a group. And so, I think one of the important things in making that transition to faculty is thinking about, what are the big science questions that I can address in kind of a 5, maybe 10-year time scale, but involving sort of, new resources and new team members. So mentoring and advising is part of that. And so in that transition for myself, as I went from postdoc to faculty, is I had a faculty member who mentored me and said, this is what you need to think about is as you're applying for these faculty positions, you need to present a vision essentially of what you want to do for the next, again, kind of roughly 5-year timescale that will be, new and innovative and bring something either brand new to that place you're applying to, or perhaps really enriches the research that's happening there. So that kind of depends on the application that you're applying for. But that was kind of I think the first, key piece for me to figure out how to think about that transition to faculty is I'm basically kind of starting a research business of my own. And I need to think about what that business is going to do, how it's going to raise money, how it's going to support the students and postdocs that are involved in that research organization to kind of get to a big goal. So we don't usually get business degrees and when we're going up through our academic careers, but some degree maybe we should, because it is kind of thinking about it from some degree from a business model. We want to get this, not a product, but a kind of scientific outcome. And how do we make that outcome happen with the resources we have or the resources that we're going to seek? And I'll bounce it to whoever wants to go next.
Maybe I can add a little bit from my own experience. So I think for me, so I similarly, like Adam, going through physics, did 2 postdocs. So after I went to grad school at Stanford, I went to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton for a first postdoc, and then actually back to Stanford for a year before starting my first faculty job. And I changed a lot from what I did in grad school. So I started in string theory. I then decided very critically to not do string theory again, which is not entirely true, but almost true, starting my postdoc. And then I was doing particle physics, and then kind of over that first postdoc realized cosmology was probably my best spot to be in. And I've been more or less there, in part because I get to do everything I like while still doing cosmology most of the time. But I think that decision to not do string theory was built out of a sense, which I think is true, has been proven, just kind of worked out to be true in my career, which is that the difference between being a grad student and eventually a postdoc and finally a faculty member is that I'm responsible as a postdoc or just an independent researcher for knowing more than just my own research, right? So for example, if I go and do a faculty interview and I'm having lunch with someone or dinner with someone and they ask me, oh, I read this press release about this new result in your field, what's going on? As a grad student, you'd be like, well, that's not really what I work on. I don't really totally understand. But if they're hiring you as a faculty member, like, you should be able to answer that question. It's your field, and who else is going to know the answer to that question? And that's part of being a good colleague. That's part of, I think, as Adam said, knowing what the interesting questions are your field are, and not just how you're going to answer them, but who else is trying to answer them. Are they going to be better at doing it than you? Or can you compete with them? Do you have an advantage over them because you know what's going on? And that was why I stopped doing string theory. And the reason was not because I couldn't do it, because I actually hated just reading the papers. I liked my own research, but I hated everyone else's research. And I'm like, I don't want to have to go to some interview and someone tells me, oh, what about this paper? And I can't just say, I didn't like it, so I didn't read it, right? Like I would have to have a well-informed and thoughtful opinion. And I just didn't want to be responsible for that space. And I found, as I evolved, I was like, cosmology had all the things I like to learn. And so learning my own stuff, but learning everyone else's stuff was super fun to me. And that kind of found the right balance of, it's a job. Part of being a job and not just a hobby is that I am responsible for this space, but I like 80% of the papers I have to read in the space I'm in now compared to when I was doing string theory, and I probably hated 80% of the papers I had to read. So I think for me, one of the pieces of advice is realizing that, like, as you're progressing through, what people are expecting of you changes, and you need to be thoughtful of, like, can I meet those expectations as I go on? And maybe I need to adjust what I do and what my research focus is or my skills are to make sure that I'm always, in this spot where I can know what's going on around me. I have some competitive advantage, so I'm, always doing cutting edge stuff. But you're thoughtful of not just you, but also what's around you. I don't know. Does anyone else want to add something?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. And I agree with all the things that you said. For me, I think maybe some practical advice would be early on in my career, a professor told me that, I've heard from a lot of PIs that what you propose that you're going to do as a professor, you'll do for maybe a year or two, but then it really changes. So like what you actually write in your research statement, that project will maybe go on for like 2 or 3 years, but then your lab really changes its direction a lot, especially if you're in a multidisciplinary area. So what you need to think about, like, very early on is how the story of your past up to when you're applying for faculty positions, if that's where you want to go, how that proves that you can start a lab and do a good job at it. So for me, for example, I did switch, like, between chemistry department, bioengineering department, but there was like a story that I was thinking about. So for example, in my PhD, I was doing very fundamental work, looking at the interaction of cells with these 3D structures and how the topography of the structures affects the cell behavior. But then I knew in the back of my mind that, I want to apply this, but the lab that I was working with at Berkeley wasn't doing much applied work. And so for my postdoc, I had like that vision to go to the lab where I can apply this work, and then I would have a complete story of, I did this fundamental research, I made these conclusions, and then now I applied it in my postdoc. So it's good to do your postdoc to learn more skills, to learn new methods, to build a bigger network, but it's always good to think about that whole storyline of what you're going to present when you go to these faculty jobs. Yeah, that was my experience.
I think to add to that is like in that kind of strategic planning that I think everyone's talked about, is to take data, right, on this process. So if you can, try and identify in your department or in the school that you're in, the job candidates who are coming and speaking, and attend some of their talks and see what they're like. You'll also often have candidates coming in at different points in their careers, maybe newly minted PhDs, maybe after 1, 2, 3 postdocs, or after being faculty elsewhere. And you can kind of see where the benchmarks kind of are, or how they're presenting themselves. And I think that the important thing in their talk is often not necessarily, or maybe for you, would be not be like the actual content, but how they're presenting it, and to think really critically about how you might present your own kind of scientific ideas. And in kind of developing this maybe framework of where you think you're going, I think one of the resources that is really underutilized, but I really appreciate was my own PhD committee, even after I had finished. So taking time to develop those relationships, and just as additional mentors, and people who are kind of informal, like committee members who I talked with, even after I graduated. And so it's just kind of like, again, this idea of collecting data. You want data points. So you have your own faculty advisor. That's like an N of one, right? And so what they say or what we say today, it's a limited worldview. So trying to get as many data points as you can, I think, is useful. The other point that I would make is, I think kind of a thread here as well is trying to assemble like a diversity of experiences so that you have an idea of where you want to go. It can be really hard if you're at a single institution along the way, or maybe there's different fields in physics. In my own experience, I just did not know what I wanted to do as I was progressing in my PhD, and I think that's okay. But at the end of my PhD, I was applying. In engineering, sometimes faculty go without a postdoc, so I was applying for positions. There were some extenuating circumstances there. I was applying for postdocs. I was also applying for industry positions. Like I really was just kind of going for it. And I actually ended up getting all three, and then having that kind of an awesome opportunity to try them out. And I negotiated everything so that I had a very short stint in industry, but then decided actually to take a postdoc prior to starting my faculty position. So it was all a little bit fast, and I can't say I had like extended experiences in these different situations, but I find that my thinking today is really informed by that other group that I joined as a postdoc, but also by the pace and questions being asked in industry and how they were kind of relevant to the research that I wanted to do. And so I think that was another valuable point in kind of building like my thinking of where things would head and what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I'll add on to David's statement that I also, I took a second postdoc position at the same time I had applied for faculty jobs, and I had gotten, very fortunately, both a postdoc and a faculty position. And I actually I delayed my faculty position so I could have that extra year as a postdoc, because I wanted to have that, extended time to really just focus on my own research. You certainly, when you go to become faculty, you are still focusing on your research, but there's a lot of other things that we're doing, obviously, with our time. And so if you have an opportunity like that where you apply for multiple layers of positions, you definitely go for it. And there are ways that you can experience multiple of those at the same time, as David did.
I think as part of that, obviously that was like incredibly kind of lucky. I feel like I won the lottery on that, but was also sampling not just kind of new spaces in research, but also the kind of job activities, where as a faculty member, you're going to be teaching, you're going to be writing a lot, both of papers and then also proposals. So, I think whether as a senior graduate student or a postdoc, or even in industry, taking the opportunity to try these things on for size, managing people, these are really important aspects of our job, kind of like Adam was saying, where it's like you're managing basically a startup, right? You end up with some budget, and your products are papers primarily. But you kind of want to know which skills you need to develop, and also whether you like all these aspects. I find that I spend way more time writing than I actually even thought I would when I started this position. And it's lucky because it turns out that I really like, especially editing and thinking about kind of crystallizing the ideas out of others' writing, which is great because I co-author with my students and colleagues. But that's kind of a little bit lucky. And so I think it's good to try and sample these activities if you have the opportunity. Try and help with a proposal or something even early on in your career.
Thank you. I want to take a quick poll and see if there's anybody who has any questions that they'd like to ask about what's been said.
Maybe in the meantime, I can add to what David was saying. I think you use the word luck a lot in what you were talking about, and it's true. You really should not underestimate the unknown or the randomness of the process. So really, like when you're applying to positions, I think it just makes it easier for yourself to deal with, is knowing that you can have the best, CV, best, experiences, but then it's not a good match with the department. So really, I would like, as everyone, like a lot of people here said, they started applying early on, maybe even when you personally don't feel like, it's the best time to apply, wait for one more year, wait for that one extra paper to come out before I apply. But I don't think, and that's, in my opinion, is not like just writing your application and starting to submit it is very valuable when you don't know what will happen. So I had the same experience, as in I was debating whether to apply last year or wait another year, and I ended up applying and I got the position. So there's a lot of randomness to the process, and you might be a very good match with the department when you're not sure whether you should wait for one more paper to come out, or get yeah. Just consider that when you're applying. There's a lot of randomness in the process, and the more applications you send out, the higher your chance. That's true for grants. That's true for job applications. True for everything in this job.
Yeah, and even if you apply early and you don't get the job, it's actually good to have that experience early on, because often we think of this kind of as a dry run for the time where you definitely need to get a job because you're running out of your postdoc position. So if you have that early experience and you can get feedback on your application, what a cover letter is supposed to look like, what should or should not be in the statement of research, that's a really good opportunity. And I should say, I applied early as postdoc to UCSD and got declined. So it's not the end of the world if it happens. It doesn't happen on the first time around. But I got a lot of feedback, particularly in that application, of what the kind of ethos of UCSD was and kind of what they were looking for. And it obviously changed over time, but at least I had kind of a better idea of how that department worked. And so I could tailor that application better the second time around.
Thank you. Adam, I particularly really like your authenticity when it comes to the rejections in your life, because I think it makes it more real, and people should talk about it so that you don't feel as disappointed when it does happen, right? So thank you for sharing that. I want to move on to another question, and it kind of relates to wisdom and advice you have for grad students and postdocs, but also thinking back to your journey and things you've learned along the way. Maybe something that you wish you would have known when you started the search. And I'll let you can think about it.
Dan, you want to lead us off?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I actually have a written thing with lots of application advice I learned on my faculty webpage. I can put it in the chat after for anyone who wants to take a look. But yeah, I think I learned a lot, like to come back to failure as a way of learning and mentors as a way of learning. There's kind of a lot of both. I found it very hard to find a good mentor. So in my experience, a lot of my mentors were kind of like, well, some of them were really lucky and they didn't even acknowledge their own luck. So they would kind of just give me advice like, yeah, you just send an application and you get a job and it's great. And you're like, well, I can't work with that because that's not my life experience. So I had one mentor in my postdoc who was just, he was just very frank, but in a positive way. He wanted me to succeed, and he would tell me to my face if I was doing something dumb, not just with my research. It would be actually better if I got more feedback on the research part, but just I was making decisions for my application where he was just like sitting on the other side. I know why you're making these decisions, but they're terrible because you don't understand how I would look at your application. So one of them was that I was really intimidated by the faculty at the Institute for Advanced Study where I was, and I was asking him for a letter of recommendation because he was the one person I had worked with, and I felt I had a fairly good working relationship. And so I was then going to ask like my friend who had just started a faculty job to write another letter, and then my PhD advisor and another person from grad school for a letter. So I'd have 4 letters. One was basically my friend who was slightly older than me, but a collaborator. And then this one professor at the Institute of Advanced Study and 2 letters from grad school. And he said, where do you think you did your best work, as your postdoc or as a grad student? I said, well, obviously my postdoc, it was pretty obvious my work had got up a significant level. And he's like, well, I'm looking at your letters. I'm not reading your friend's letter, right? Like he's too junior. I don't know what you work too closely together. It doesn't mean anything. And so now I really have just 3 letters from people who have sort of been around long enough. I know what to do with them. 2 of them are from where you did your less significant work. So you need to get a letter from somebody else here who's kind of senior enough and respectable enough that like people take them seriously. And I was terrified. I was like, well, I don't want to ask these people for letters because I don't know what they think. But what I was doing was I was basically trading making a good decision because it was scary for making a bad decision because it made me more comfortable. And that's kind of the pattern I see in myself and others, which is like, same with taking a postdoc, right? Like that postdoc is a really intense place and I don't know that I like how I would succeed there. This place is more comfortable, but that's not the same as saying which place is going to advance my career, which place is going to teach me the things that I don't know how to do right now and is going to really push me ahead. And so I think so that's like an example where I really just, I needed somebody to tell me that piece of advice and just get that frank, like, you're making bad decisions. And it's like, you don't know how the person on the other side is going to read this, but they're going to not, that letter you think is going to help you, no one's taking it seriously. And I think the part of that then the second piece of advice that was really helpful, particularly when you're looking for letters, because letters play such an important role in the academic world, was that I had always thought like I need to get every letter kind of has to have everything in it. It has to have their personal relationship to you. They need to say that you're great. They need to say you did all the work on a paper you wrote together. And what this mentor told me, he was like, look, you should think of all of your letters together as one story. And so if you need a letter, you need 3 things out of this combination. You need it to say that you're doing world-class research. So your papers are very important. It needs to say you did the work on those papers, and it needs to say that you're a good colleague and a person people like to interact with. But not every letter has to say all those things. So sometimes a letter from someone you don't work with personally, but can speak to, I don't know how much Dan did on this paper, but this is the best paper I've ever read. And then another letter that says, I don't know how important this paper is, but Dan did all the work, together tells a story where I am doing world-class work and it's all me. And so together, that's a very powerful combination, where in isolation, they don't tell the full story. And I had gone into the process thinking like, I was picking these things like, well, I've worked with this person, so they know all the things I did on the paper, but I wasn't accounting for like, it means something different to have a person who can really vouch for the quality of your work write a letter, even if they weren't an author on it, so they can't say, what I was doing on every single day of the project. And overall, I think like it was things like that, just getting that, like asking people for that kind of feedback and demanding that people look at the decisions you're making and say like, is this really the right way to think about putting your application together? And I still don't get that advice very often. When I'm writing grants, I would love to get more critical feedback as opposed to, yeah, it's pretty good. It's not really helpful advice, but sometimes that's all you can get from colleagues, unfortunately. So as a young person, I would really demand that. I would ask around. And if people don't give you aren't questioning what you're doing, like I would go and look for somebody else who might give you some really make you think, is this the right way to put together an application? Is this the right kind of research proposal for my skill set? I think that's really, really important.
Thank you. That was great. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add on a little bit maybe about things that I guess a lot of postdocs are dead serious about getting a faculty position, but it's really good to think about the big picture and keeping your options open. I mean, again, like David said, that you should see the stats, look at the numbers, and have the plan B, C for yourself. I found like postdoc generally the most stressful time of my graduate career because it's such a temporary position, and you don't know what's coming next. And in that time, it's good to think about really like what are the next steps, and what are the chances of me getting a faculty position. Not to give up on your dreams, nothing like that, but it's really, there's so many great industry research positions. Like I did not even know, for example, about Google. They have labs that do research. You can do like nanofabrication, microfabrication, build devices, test them. Very similar research, maybe not the mentorship aspect, but you can still go give talks. You can still like mentor a small group. There's like very similar roles as a PI would have in a university setting. So it's good to know all these options and still work towards a faculty role if that's really what you want, but also keep those options open and consider those while you move forward.
So I'll throw in one thing that I wish I had known as a postdoc going into faculty positions. The one thing, so I, again, as an observational astronomer, I do have to put a lot of proposals in to get time. So I was used to the proposal process, but I wasn't as aware or cognizant that grant writing is really kind of the one of the major activities that faculty we continue to do year on year, because again, you're kind of sustaining this business model for your research you're doing, or the students that you're supporting or postdocs you're supporting. And so when I started as a faculty member, I had a very slow start to learning how to apply for grants, prioritizing that. Like I was like, I just wanted to get to do my research and focus on that. And I think that held me back early on, not having that. Again, maybe just the mentoring to say, this is a really important activity as a faculty member, and you need to start practicing this early on. I still, after years and years, you get some practice anyway, so it's okay. But it is something that I wish I had known earlier, so that I can kind of get an earlier jump start on that. And I've been able to communicate to my postdocs that even as postdocs, they should start to put in funding applications. And one of my postdocs ended up paying for her like 2 years of her postdoc just on her own. So she, and that level, that kind of freed her up from the, I think what Zainab was saying, the kind of pressure that you have to apply for the next position. If you're funding yourself, you're fine, for at least for a couple of years. So that's something I wish I had known a little bit more as I was going into thinking about academic careers and starting academic careers. But eventually we have to know that, because we have to do it.
I think along those lines, one of the things I didn't know was how much I would learn, kind of learn by doing, or I probably more like learn by failing would be a better description, particularly on like grants, but then also on some of early independent papers, where research is full of failure, just the act of research. But then, being a professor, I think that something that we don't often talk about that much is that it is absolutely full of failure, right? Where you're constantly being rejected on grants, and often, from papers or, bouncing around or something. And so, but you get, you learn from each of these events. And I think even if the ideas contained within a proposal, for example, that has failed, don't materialize in one fashion, sometimes it's like over the course of several years or even longer, ultimately somehow I find that they end up getting woven into work or other proposals that do succeed. So I think the postdoc was extremely stressful but then, of course, starting as a faculty is also, you basically have no idea what you're doing, and it's also very stressful and full of failure. And I think the failure part was something that I wasn't like quite as ready for in terms of just the constancy of it. But then it gets better. I think you kind of, everyone, or a lot of my mentors said, like, this is normal, like, you'll figure it out, it'll be okay. Right? And I was like, how can you say that? Like, you don't know that. It really kind of, it was a stressful time. But, I wish at some level I had believed in that a little bit more. Maybe I could have been a little bit less stressed at the start. But, it's a winding road, I guess.
Yeah, for those of you worried about, the failure stress, I think one, saving grace of all this is that if that grant doesn't get funded or that paper doesn't get accepted, I still have a job, right? So there's, kind of like allowable failure. It's a little less pressure to fail, which is very important for the creative and research process. You need to be trying and throwing ideas out there and seeing what sticks. It's, I felt like in his faculty position, yes, there was that kind of like, oh, like, I'm not like getting funding in, but at the same time, I still have my job. So it wasn't existential failure.
Can I add on the failure front is just that I think the hard part is knowing when to like, failure is informative, but there's a lot of noise, right? And I think it's really hard to sort out the like, when is the failure have nothing to do with you, because you often don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And so an example that was really where I really started to understand this for the first time was when I was older. I was applying for some jobs in California, and after already having started a faculty job, and now I had friends who were in faculty positions, so I could hear kind of what was going on. Whereas when I was a postdoc, I was just sending these applications and I was getting a yes or no back, and it's this total black box interaction. And so I'd sent an application, and the job description was very general. I sounded like I was going to get a fit for it. But my friend was on the faculty and actually on the committee. He's like, yeah, we were required to put a general list out. And it was actually written into the rules of the department that basically, like, they were going to hire in this super duper narrow area that I didn't fit into. And so it would have been really easy. So I knew, like, if it was me 3 years before, I would have taken that rejection really harshly, because I'd been like, I thought it was such a good fit there. They're looking in my field. It's like, no, that was what the thing said when you applied, but it was actually completely meaningless. I just wasn't doing exactly what they were looking for. And that came back negative for obvious reasons. And so my friend was like, I even tried to get you on, but there was no chance anyway. So it would have just been a free trip to come talk to me. And that's about it. And so I think that's the hard part, is like, is when to be like, that rejection, particularly with grants, but really anything, if you can get feedback from it, because the yes or no might not tell you anything at all. So for example, you get a grant back and it's like, this is a terrible idea and it will never work. And you're like, whoever read this has no idea what they're talking about, because I've already done it, because often you've actually written the proposal for work that you've pretty much finished. So you're like, this person has no idea what they're talking about. But sometimes the feedback is like, like, this is not concrete enough. Like, I can't fund a proposal for this kind of pie in the sky things with no real details of how it's going to work. And you're like, yeah, that's a real criticism. I could have written that better. Or, someone can give you feedback on your interview. And I definitely screwed up a lot of interviews because I didn't know how to talk to people. And they'd ask me questions like, where's your field going in 5 years? And I kind of hadn't really thought about it until the moment of the interview. And it's like, no, I should have had like a answer ready to go. I was like, I've been waiting for someone to ask me that. I've got a super positive vision of the future. And it took me, I don't even want to admit how many bad interviews, to just be like, no, those are the questions you should have prepared for ahead of time. And getting that, realizing that I got the feedback from failing a lot. But it's knowing the difference, right? Like, I failed for reasons that have nothing to do with me versus I failed for things that were in my control and I can do better on. And it's really hard, I think, especially at the postdoc level, because often if you don't seek it out, you just get back a yes or no. And you take it personally, you take every no personally, and sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with you. And if you don't know that, then you start making other bad decisions to compensate for a thing that didn't actually tell you anything useful.
Maybe there are kind of like two components. One is like the blast approach. You you try a lot and you get feedback that way. But then it kind of from the feedback from your friend, drawing on that idea is really helpful if you can somehow try and get additional information from, again, your committee network, your network, like from conferences, your PhD committee, like a friend of a friend of a friend who you can call and talk to on the phone, any little tidbits that can help you shape it, or even just find out if it's like a super narrow thing that's painted generally that actually you'd be better off spending your time somewhere else. I think some combination of the two with weights that are, up to you, I think can be valuable.
Yeah, and as Adam mentioned before, just even if you're fully funded for your PhD or your postdoc, don't hesitate to write fellowships, even if your PI doesn't, suggest it. You'll learn how to write fellowships, but also if you do fail early on several times, you'll get used to this failure, or like you'll respond better to it. For example, for me, for the first 2 years of my PhD, I was funded, but then third and fourth year were not so certain. So I submitted a lot of fellowships, and I did fail in a lot of them. So it was just the first failure you get on these, fellowships or grants. It really hurts, but then over time you learn how to make it better, but also you learn how to, live with this failure. It's not the end of the world. You have to submit. A lot of them have 10% success rate, 20% success rate, and that's high. 20% success rate is pretty high. So there's a lot of unknown, and you'll learn a lot from just writing, submitting. You'll learn a lot about the process. So even if your PIs don't suggest it to you, you should find something that's related to your research. There are so many different fellowships out there, and it's great for your CV as well, even if you don't need the money. So I really recommend to apply for fellowships in postdoc and PhD.
Thank you. I know that was a lot of information, and some of you might be really overwhelmed with things you have to get started on. Are there any questions that come up for you? Anybody in the audience that you're thinking about, that you're grappling with, maybe even just personal advice that you want to ask? Are you debating between industry and academia? What's going on?
I can ask a question. So I'm last year, I'm almost starting my last year PhD, and I have a lot of uncertainty. So I'm not really sure. I don't know if you have passed through similar experience during your PhD or not, but it's kind of part of self-doubt. You don't know yet that you're will be fit for academia, or you'll be able to do all of this by yourself and lead a group and stuff like that. And at the same time, I think at this time I'm just very uncertain. It's kind of a lot of options, and part of me would think that, well, I know that I love research, doing research the most. So would I do this? But at the same time, maybe I don't want to just go forward with another option just because I'm hesitant and so on. So do you have advice for this? I don't know if you probably have already covered that in your in what you said, but I mean, I'm also I'm uncertain about should I try industry for some time, or should I just go to postdoc, or there are different options. Do you have advice on how to deal with this, or think about it?
So I could probably pull up a number of emails that I sent my partner over time that were I'm never going to be a faculty member. Why? During my grad school, because I was just very uncertain on what I wanted, and I think that's okay. But in the end, what I kind of decided, and also encourage my mentees, is to create opportunities if you can, and then make decisions. And so sometimes you close off opportunities by, maybe it's, self-doubt, or just not uncertainty. But instead, I think if you're applying to industry positions or faculty positions, a lot of what they're looking for on a CV might look quite similar. And so kind of your goals, I think, are generally pretty well aligned. And then it's in the application process, kind of like we've described here, that you might frame things differently depending upon the position, because they do have generally different job requirements. But I don't think it's a problem. I mean, and I personally was applying for both, right? Because I wasn't sure. And then as it happened, I was fortunate to have this decision, do I go to industry now? Do I start with academia? And basically, because it's such a kind of rare opportunity to have the academic track available, I decided to try that first. But, it's sort of like this isn't necessarily, a final decision either, right? There's always other options out there. So that's my kind of personal take is, try and create opportunities, and then you have decisions to make.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Sarah, what program are you getting your PhD in?
I'm electrical engineering. I think one of the problems is that the lab I work in is very applied. So like actually all students who have graduated from our labs so far went to industry. No one went to academia before. It's kind of I'm the first person who usually talk with this about this with my supervisor, and he's totally okay with it. But I think he's usually inclined towards industry, and he would for example, keeps like telling me to do internship, and like I was like at the same time also hesitant about this. Would I do internship? It's kind of not on the long-term plan that I'm wanting to do, but at the same time his idea is that you would have the industry option open if you don't really get any academic job, and it's at the same time makes me a bit hesitant about myself. Should I focus on one thing and prepare myself for it, or should I just prepare myself for many things, which means that I cannot really in the end I cannot really prepare myself for everything perfectly. It will just be like a mix of skills from academia and industry, and it might not actually be good enough for either. This is something I also uncertain about. I know I think just like when I started my last year, it's beginning a cycle of uncertainty and freaking out sometimes. So yeah, just
Yeah, and Sarah, that's totally normal because you for the last several years it's been very clear what your goal is. It's to work toward your PhD, and that transition to now I have this whole umbrella of opportunities and options can be very daunting. So that's a totally normal feeling. And I think the important thing is not so much that you have to be prepared for every option, but you should be open to options, right? So you should see that these opportunities are different paths that you can take if you want, but you don't have to be perfectly prepared for industry and perfectly prepared for academia. And I think one of the things that David said is that like when we started off as professors, we had no idea what we're doing. Like we weren't totally prepared and trained to become professors. We learned how to be professors by being professors. So don't feel the pressure that you have to be the perfect candidate for any of these pathways. You're absolutely right. That's too much to expect and too much to prepare for. But it is useful to be open to, maybe we'll try this path and maybe we'll try this path. I think the important thing is kind of figuring out for yourself what's important to you. Like, what do you value as your career? What do you value doing, as a grad student that you think you want to continue doing, or something you'd like to do that you haven't had the opportunity to do up to this point? The person you got to live with in terms of approval is you. So, if you see yourself as like, I would really love to be teaching, then that might steer you more to academia. But it's totally okay to be unsure at the stage. I think I can only speak for myself, but I was very unsure, and I had a pretty clear path, but I was still not sure that was the right path for me. And so that's totally fine.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it makes me feel a bit better.
Can I add a small comment?
Yeah.
So I think this is related to things that both David and Adam were saying. But so there's a book that I really like for just general career advice. It's by Richard Hamming. It's called The Art of Doing Science and Engineering. I think it's an amazing book with full of really good advice. But the sort of central idea of the book is that no matter what you're doing, it's not going to be the same 5-10 years down the road. Just the growth of human knowledge is so fast that you can never be prepared for your career. So because it's not your career 10 years from now is going to be totally different. So the thing that sets apart people who are really successful from people who are less successful is their ability to learn as they go along, because they can never be fully ready for whatever the opportunity is. And so what Adam and David are saying, that's true for academia. You're thrown into this professor you're not prepared to do, but even the job of professor isn't the same as the job of professor 20 years ago. And it won't be the same 10 years from now. It certainly wasn't the same during COVID. We can all agree with that. And so I think like the thing that you're worried about, like, oh, if I do this, am I going to be prepared to work in industry? Or if I do this, am I going to be prepared to work in academia? You're like, it doesn't matter, because 5 years from now, your preparation today isn't going to be relevant anyway. It's your ability to move with the field, to go into something and be fully committed to it, and learn on the job. And that's the thing that, if you're comfortable doing that, you'll be successful no matter what you do and no matter what path you take. So I don't see it as being like so binary, like if I choose this and I won't be prepared to do that. Like, I think no matter what you choose, you can learn the skills you need on the job, because that's really critical no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, I have the same
Thank you.
experience as everyone else. Like, self-doubt is there, definitely. Through your PhD, towards the end of it gets worse, and then postdoc again, because it's unclear what you're going to do next. And then even when you start as a faculty, can I do this job? But as David said, if you make those opportunities for yourself, you can let the hiring committee decide, whether you're fit for the job or not, for a specific job that you apply to. But the most important thing is to know at least like what the job would entail, at least in the immediate future, like once you start. So if you love research, you can see whether as a faculty you actually be doing, do you love doing the experiments? Do you love coming up with ideas? Do you like writing grants? Do you like mentoring students? Do you like teaching? These questions you should ask yourself. And then in industry, there's same opportunities, maybe except for the teaching. You could do an industry postdoc to learn more like the industry setting. Internships, I personally think if a student is debating between academia and industry, doing a internship in your PhD doesn't delay anything. It's maybe half a year, less than half a year, and you learn a lot from it. So I don't think that would, say that you're not focusing on your main goal, which is to be a faculty. If you do internship in industry, you'll learn a lot from it if it's a good internship, and it's something that you might consider later on. And if you have no experience in industry, that would be one way to learn about it.
I see. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Good luck.
All right, we're at time. Thank you so much for joining us today. This recording will be available on the Grad Talks website by next week. Have an amazing weekend. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.